Hi everyone, I'm Kirsty McLeod. I'm the Mental Health and Wellbeing Co-ordinator at the college, and today we're doing a Let's Talk video on the blurred lines between gambling and gaming. And to talk about that, I've got Warren Hughes here from Fast Forward. Hi Warren, thank you very much for being here today.
Hi there. So just to introduce myself to everyone, my name's Warren Hughes from an organisation called Fast Forward. We are working on a project called the Gambling Education Hub, which was commissioned by an organisation called Gamble Aware. Our aim is just to ensure that all young people around Scotland have access to gambling education and prevention resources. Quite simple, and we've only got a small team, but in doing so, we work directly with students and student support services as well.
Fantastic. So I'll be honest, this is kind of something that's quite new to me. I guess, maybe like a lot of people, my perception of gambling was, particularly older people, mainly males. I have images of betting shops, casinos, maybe arcades, that kind of thing. But obviously, that's not the case anymore. Can you tell us a wee bit more about how kind of gambling and gaming, show up together, but also, the ways that it kind of affects students?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's a conversation I have a lot when I work with anyone, and they say, "Well, why are you focusing on gambling in young people when gambling is just something that older people do, or older men specifically?" And it's really important to emphasize that gambling is something that isn't age specific or gender specific. There's men that gamble, there's women that gamble, and there's also a vast range of different ages that gamble as well. One of the issues is that perhaps a lot of the newer types of gambling, or the more popular types of gambling, like online gambling or video games that are starting to feature gambling-like features, they're becoming more appealing to younger people or more vulnerable groups as well, which is why the education behind such is so important.
Yeah, and I think, well, disclaimer, I'm not a gamer, so that kind of blows my mind that that's kind of part and parcel of it. And it sounds to me like it's maybe something that even gamers might not be so aware of, when they're playing, that these kind of techniques are being included that kind of encourages them to gamble. Could you give us some kind of examples of what those things might be?
Yeah, definitely. I think before speaking about that specifically, I think it's really important to emphasize that gaming isn't a bad thing. Gaming is actually a great thing. I'm a gamer myself,
yeah.
And gaming can be used for education, it can be used for physiotherapy, it can be used even as things like a stress release. But when we're looking at things like gambling-like features, that's when there are risks involved. And some of the issues with these, as games have advanced, they've had to look at new ways to monetize them. The gaming industry looks at new ways of making money, and they've started microtransactions, which are just quick transactions within games. A lot of people might have seen apps on their phone where they've made small transactions, and these microtransactions can be 79p, or they can be right up to hundreds of pounds. But where it becomes perhaps a bit more harmful is when you don't know what you're going to get. A microtransaction where you're paying for something and it could be anything within that game. They're called loot boxes, and they're becoming more and more prevalent within video games, and they are very similar to gambling-like mechanics. That's not the only issue that's similar to gambling, but it is one that's receiving a lot of news at the moment in terms of its exposure to young and vulnerable groups.
Yeah. And esports, Warren, is that something that kind of can involve gambling as well?
Yeah, esports is the professional competing in video games, and it's incredibly popular. It's growing massively around the world in terms of the global audience. Where it can be an issue rising is the increasing number of people that are gambling on esports. And actually, during the coronavirus lockdown, gambling on esports was the type of gambling that increased more than any other type of gambling, which is perhaps it's a sort of questionable statistic at first, but actually a lot of young people are incredibly interested in esports. So if you think about who this gambling is appealing to, then it's certainly younger groups.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, you make the important point that gaming in itself isn't bad or harmful. It's just maybe these other kind of features that can be, you know, or more negative. Obviously, the financial side of it is a big one. But I'm just wondering what are the kind of other ways that gaming and gambling can impact on people in terms of kind of mental health and well-being side of it?
Yeah, I think it's taking that side of things away, like the loot boxes. Gaming and gambling as activities themselves are very similar. They're similar in how they make people feel. They're similar to how they affect your brain in terms of how stimulated you can become. A lot of modern gambling games almost look and feel like video games as the kind of the way. I mean, that's very popular. And then likewise, a lot of video games look and feel like gambling games. And so all of these risks, because of the advanced technology and the gaming industry realize how popular gambling is becoming, the gambling industry is realizing how popular gaming is becoming, and that's starting to see these blurred lines, which is posing risks if we don't put things in place to educate people that they exist.
And so those risks, I guess, are things, you know, how might somebody recognize that their gaming's maybe becoming problematic, or how can people sort of be aware of and understand that maybe things are going a bit awry?
Yeah, I think it's important to say that the majority of people that play games or that gamble do so safely or in a safe way. It is only a small amount of people that do experience harm, but that harm, whether it's spending money within video games or whether it's spending money on gambling, that harm can be devastating. It can affect people's mental health, it can affect people's relationships, perhaps their education or their employment, and even it can affect communities and wider society as well, which is why gambling is being recognised as a public health issue. More specifically, looking at the sort of signs and symptoms of and what to look out for, if people are becoming perhaps aggressive or defensive around the money that they're spending or the activities themselves, if they're spending more time than they would like and the time that they're spending on these activities is starting to intrude on the time that they should have spent socializing with others, with their family, or on their education or employment. When they start prioritizing these activities over the other parts of their life and it's becoming harmful, that's when it's definitely something to look out for.
Okay. And if people do start to recognize those things kind of happening, what are the ways that people can kind of help to manage those?
Well, I mean, before those things start happening, Fast Forward as an organization works in harm reduction, and we promote harm reduction techniques. So we respect that people will spend money within video games and people will gamble, but providing the tips on how to do it in a safer way is really important. Some of the tips include setting limits with the money that you're spending, making sure that that's within your means as well, so that you're not spending money that should be prioritized elsewhere. You can also set limits with your time and making sure that the time that you're spending isn't time that should be spent on your education or your employment or with your friends and family. And just making sure that you are taking time out, you're taking breaks and you're tracking what you're spending. All of these tips can be really useful to help minimize the harm that can happen in these activities.
Right. Yeah, I think so. A lot of those kind of strategies are things around like sort of mixing your activities up. So it's not, like you say, it's not that you're just doing gaming. You're still attending to study and looking after yourself, whether that's exercise, spending time with friends and family, having that mixture. So if our students, do start to recognise those signs and they're maybe a wee bit worried, how can they access support? I'm just going to share my screen with you and then I can show this.
One of the first things I would recommend if someone is starting to struggle or thinks someone's struggling is just to be open and honest and communicate and open up about that. There's lots of people there to support, including the student services at whatever college or university that you're at. But one tip can be to become familiar with the signs and that someone might be struggling, whether it's yourself or someone else. And you can find those tips on begambleaware.org. There's loads of information on there, as well as signposting to specialist support services, such as the National Gambling Treatment Service, which is a network of organisations all around the UK, all working to support those that are experiencing gambling harms, if it's the gambler or their friends and their family and those around them. In particular, in Scotland, we have the RCA Trust, which are specialists in providing support to young people around gambling, and we've got a GamCare Young Persons Service as well. If somebody is gambling and they want to restrict their access and cut down, there are sites and blockers that you can use, or self-exclusion. Gamban, for example, you can take a screenshot of this page and it's got all of the information that I'm speaking about. But Gamban's one that you can download, and it restricts access to gambling on all your devices, and it's actually free for students or anyone with a .ac.uk email address.
Great, that sounds a really practical kind of way of sort of reducing your time on those kinds of things. And I guess the other thing to mention is that, following on from what you said, even if it might not be you, but you might be worried about a friend or a family member, that these are all organisations that you can maybe let them know about, or kind of share with them. We've also got our website up here as well. So this is the Student Mental Health and Wellbeing Support webpage. You can find loads of information there about some of the the resources that Warren's just mentioned. There's also ways to contact our student advisors. So for example, if you do have maybe concerns about kind of debt and things like that, but also just there's loads of advice on there about how to look after your mental health and your well-being. So if you are experiencing some of these signs, even if you're not, but maybe you're recognizing that you are feeling kind of stressed, and maybe gaming's maybe the only thing that you're using, because it is a really positive strategy, but like everything, it's finding that balance. So there's loads of resources on there. You can also access the counselling service by booking a wellbeing assessment through My City, and you'll get all the information again on that webpage. So thank you so much, Warren. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen there so that I can say goodbye. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been really useful and helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. My pleasure.